Welcome to RankLens. Today, we count down the top 10 biggest corporate bankruptcies in history. Companies aren't immune to spectacular collapse. Fortune 500 giants can crumble in weeks, billions vanish, thousands lose jobs overnight. Today, we're counting down the 10 biggest corporate bankruptcies in American history, measured by the staggering dollar losses when these behemoths hit rock bottom. From fraud to financial mismanagement to perfect storms of bad timing, these are the falls that shook the economy and reshaped entire industries. Some you'll recognize immediately. Others might surprise you. Get ready, the countdown starts now. At number 10, MF Global, a $41 billion bankruptcy that exposed how quickly trust evaporates when billions are at stake. This commodities and financial futures giant was helmed by John Corzine, a heavyweight in the industry and former CEO of Goldman Sachs. When the Eurozone crisis deepened, Corzine made an audacious gamble. He placed massive, leveraged bets on troubled European sovereign debt, thinking it was a sure bet that would reap huge rewards. But the bets soured fast. What followed was chaos. Roughly $1.6 billion in customer funds, money that customers had deposited in good faith, vanished. Federal investigations rolled in, hunting for answers, hunting for the missing cash. Corzine's name became synonymous with a catastrophic failure of risk management. At number 9, Conseco, $61 billion in losses, an insurance giant brought down by a single catastrophic acquisition. Here's the story. Conseco made what looked like a brilliant move in 1998. They spent $6 billion to acquire Green Tree Financial, a company specializing in loans for manufactured homes. On paper, it seemed like smart diversification. In reality, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Green Tree's subprime loan portfolio, made to borrowers with weak credit, started falling apart almost immediately after the takeover. Defaults piled up. The housing market faltered. By 2002, Conseco filed for bankruptcy. It was the third largest U.S. bankruptcy on record at the time. Executives had gambled on a company they didn't understand, with borrowers they couldn't sustain. At number 8, Enron, $63 billion lost, and a cautionary tale about the power of deception in corporate America. Enron was an energy trading powerhouse, riding high in the 1990s as a symbol of innovation and success. Behind closed doors, though, executives were committing one of the most brazen frauds in American history. They used complex, deliberately obscure off-balance sheet financial structures to hide billions, literally billions, in debt. The real financial picture was buried so deep that nobody could see it. When the truth emerged in 2001, the collapse was swift and merciless. Thousands of employees who had poured their careers into the company, who held Enron stock in their retirement accounts, watched their life savings evaporate overnight. The scandal also destroyed Arthur Andersen, Enron's auditor and once a titan of global accounting, erased from existence simply by association with the fraud. At number 7, Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, $71 billion in losses. This isn't a story of bad loans or fraud. This is about infrastructure, negligence, and the intersection of natural disaster with human responsibility. PG&E is California's largest utility company, delivering power to tens of millions of residents across the state. But for years, the company had deferred maintenance on aging equipment that, as California's fire seasons grew longer and hotter, became increasingly dangerous. In 2018, a catastrophic wind-driven fire swept through Northern California. It was called the Camp Fire. Investigators traced the ignition to PG&E power lines. The Camp Fire became California's deadliest wildfire in history, more than 85 people killed. The liability was staggering. Billions in settlements. PG&E filed for bankruptcy, unable to cover the accumulated wildfire damages. At number 6, CIT Group, $80 billion lost. A financing powerhouse that even government bailouts couldn't save. CIT Group was the lender for America's small and mid-sized businesses. Millions of companies, from manufacturers to retailers to startups, relied on CIT for essential financing to keep their operations running. But when the 2008 financial crisis hit, CIT's business model imploded. The government stepped in to try to stabilize the situation. CIT received $2.3 billion in emergency TARP bailout funds, a taxpayer-backed rescue designed to keep the lender alive. Despite the injection, it wasn't enough. CIT filed for bankruptcy, one of the largest lending institutions to collapse during the crisis. Here's the striking part. CIT was restructured and emerged from bankruptcy in just 40 days, a pre-packaged, lightning-fast reorganization. At number 5, General Motors, $82 billion, one of the most iconic American companies ever, brought to its knees by the 2008 financial crisis. General Motors wasn't just any car company. For more than 70 consecutive decades, GM had been the largest automaker in the entire world. It was a crown jewel of American manufacturing, an employer of hundreds of thousands, a symbol of industrial prowess. But the financial crisis caught up to the automaker. Sales plummeted. Supply chains fractured. The company that had dominated for 7 decades faced extinction. The government made an unprecedented decision. The U.S. Treasury injected tens of billions of dollars to stabilize the company. In fact, the government became a majority shareholder in what used to be America's preeminent automaker. Like CIT Group, GM accomplished the seemingly impossible, a complete restructuring in just 40 days. At number 4, WorldCom, $107 billion, and a fraud so audacious it defined an era of corporate scandal. WorldCom had built itself into the dominant long-distance phone carrier for American businesses. As the internet boom exploded, WorldCom positioned itself at the center of American telecommunications infrastructure. Behind the scenes, though, CEO Bernard Ebbers and his executives were engaged in a fraud of staggering proportions. They were cooking the books. Auditors would eventually uncover roughly $11 billion in fraudulent accounting entries hidden within the company's financial statements. The numbers didn't add up because they were invented. When the fraud was exposed, the company collapsed. Bernard Ebbers was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, a powerful statement about the consequences of corporate fraud. At number 3, Silicon Valley Bank, SVB Financial Group, $212 billion in losses, and the second largest bank collapse in U.S. history. This one is recent. This one still stings. SVB wasn't a traditional bank. It was the bank for American tech startups. Venture capital-backed companies, pre-IPO unicorns, ambitious founders, they all banked at SVB. The bank had become so intertwined with the startup ecosystem that its health was synonymous with the health of innovation itself. But in 2023, a crisis unfolded in real time. Rising interest rates had eroded the value of SVB's bond portfolio. Deposits started flowing out, and then social media caught fire. Investors and startup founders posted warnings, bank run. In just 48 hours, billions in deposits were withdrawn. The bank couldn't meet the demand. Collapse. At number 2, Washington Mutual, $328 billion, the largest savings and loan association in American history and the largest bank failure ever recorded. WAMU, as it was known, had been a pillar of American banking for decades. It had financed countless mortgages, helped families buy homes, been woven into the financial lives of millions of Americans across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. But the 2008 mortgage crisis exploded, and WAMU's loan portfolio imploded along with it. The bank had made massive bets on subprime mortgages, risky loans to borrowers with weak credit. As home values collapsed and defaults skyrocketed, WAMU's financial foundation cracked. The FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, had no choice. They seized the bank and sold its assets to J.P. Morgan Chase in a fire sale transaction. WAMU was gone, erased, absorbed into another institution. And now, at number 1, Lehman Brothers, $691 billion, the bankruptcy that triggered a global financial catastrophe. This is the moment that changed everything. September 15, 2008. Lehman Brothers, one of the oldest and most respected investment banks in the world, filed for bankruptcy. The company had operated for 100 years. A century and a half of surviving panics, wars, depressions, recessions. But it didn't survive 2008. When Lehman collapsed, the financial world convulsed. Credit markets froze. Banks stopped lending to each other. The financial system itself nearly broke down. This single bankruptcy triggered a domino effect that became a global financial crisis. Over 25,000 Lehman employees across offices worldwide lost their jobs overnight. Retirement accounts were wiped out. Life savings vanished. Lehman's implosion forced a complete reckoning with how we regulate, how we manage risk, and what safeguards we need to prevent the next collapse. These 10 bankruptcies tell a story about greed, negligence, leverage, and systemic risk. Some were driven by fraud, executives who lied to shareholders and markets. Others by reckless gambling on assets they didn't understand. Others by infrastructure failure and liability they couldn't escape. But there's a through line. When billion-dollar institutions fail, the pain ripples outward to millions of workers, investors, and families who did nothing wrong. The bankruptcies we counted down shaped how we regulate, insure, and govern the financial system today. They forced change. They demanded accountability, and they remind us that size and history offer no immunity from catastrophic failure. And that's the top 10 biggest corporate bankruptcies in history. If you enjoyed this countdown, subscribe to RankLens for more.